had no idea what I was walking into that afternoon. It was just another errand on my list. Return the baby car seat to Target because of a recall notice. Nothing unusual about it. I loaded my son, Noah, into the stroller, grabbed the receipt, and headed to the store. The customer service desk wasn't too busy, which was a relief because Noah was already starting to get fussy. The guy behind the counter looked to be in his early 20s, tall, wiry, with dark circles under his eyes. His name tag read Nate. He gave me this weird half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Returning the car seat, huh?" he said, scanning the box. "Good call. You wouldn't want the little guy to end up, choking on the straps or something." I froze for a second. Who says something like that? It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said it. Too casual, too off. I gave him a tight smile, trying to brush it off. "Yeah, safety first, right?" He just grinned, handed me my receipt, and muttered, "Wouldn't want anything to happen to him." I walked out of the store with a knot in my stomach. Maybe he was just socially awkward. Maybe I was overreacting. But his tone lingered in my mind the rest of the day. A few days later, I was back at the same Target. Noah and I had settled into a routine of weekly shopping trips, and I figured I'd knock it out while he napped in the stroller. The aisles were quiet, and I was distracted debating which diapers to buy when I felt it, a chill creeping up my spine. Turning around, I saw an empty spot where Noah's stroller had been. Panic surged through me as I scanned the aisle, my heart pounding. Then I saw him. Nate. He was pushing Noah's stroller like it was the most natural thing in the world, smiling down at my baby like they were old friends. For a moment, I couldn't move. Then everything in me snapped.
"Hey!"
I screamed, my voice cracking.
"What the hell are you doing with my baby?"
Heads turned. Other shoppers froze. Nate looked up at me, his face blank like he couldn't understand why I was upset. "Relax," he said. "I was just keeping an eye on him. Thought you might have needed a hand." I grabbed the stroller from him, my hand shaking. "Don't you ever go near my son again," I shouted, my voice echoing down the aisle. Security was called. Nate didn't put up a fight as they escorted him out of the store. But before he left, he turned to me and said something I'll never forget. "You should thank me. He's a special kid." I didn't even know what that meant. All I knew was that I needed to get out of there. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, that eerie grin, and heard his words over and over again. It had been a couple of weeks since the incident at Target, and while I tried to move on, I couldn't shake the feeling that Nate wasn't done. I kept replaying the way he looked at Noah, like he knew something I didn't. My husband, James, told me I was overthinking it, that Nate was just a creep who'd been fired and wouldn't dare show his face again. I wanted to believe him. One afternoon, I was running errands at a Walmart across town. Noah was snug in his stroller, babbling away as I shopped. The store was busier than usual, and I felt a little more at ease surrounded by people. But then, out of nowhere, I felt that same chill, the one that crawls up your spine when you know someone's watching you. I looked around, my heart already racing, and that's when I saw him. Nate. He was standing at the end of the cereal aisle, leaning casually against the shelf, just staring at me with that same unnerving smile. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it. There was no way he'd show up here, right? But then he moved. Slowly, like he had all the time in the world, he walked toward me. My throat tightened as I instinctively pushed Noah's stroller closer to me. "Hey there," he said, his voice dripping with fake cheerfulness. "Funny running into you again." "What do you want?" I snapped, trying to sound braver than I felt. My palms were sweating, and my heartbeat was deafening in my ears. He ignored my question and instead glanced down at Noah. "He's growing fast, cute kid. I bet he'll do great things one day." I stepped back, gripping the stroller handle tightly. "Stay away from us," I hissed, loud enough to catch the attention of a couple of other shoppers. Nate smirked, leaned in slightly, and whispered, "You can't protect him forever." I lost it. I screamed for help, drawing the attention of employees and security. But just like that, Nate disappeared, slipping away into the crowd like a ghost. The security guard searched the store, but it was no use. He was gone. After the Walmart incident, I knew I couldn't brush this off anymore. Nate wasn't just some awkward weirdo. He was following us, watching us. I called the police that evening, desperate for help. The officer who showed up listened patiently as I explained everything, from the strange comment at Target to him taking Noah's stroller and now this new encounter. "Do you have any proof he's been following you?" the officer asked. His tone wasn't dismissive, but it was clear he didn't see the urgency I felt. I shook my head, frustrated. "I don't have proof, but isn't it obvious? He keeps showing up wherever we go. He's obsessed with my son." The officer nodded, jotting down notes in his pad. "We'll file a report, but without physical evidence or direct threats, there's not much we can do. If you see him again, call us immediately." It wasn't the reassurance I'd hoped for. As the officer left, I felt more helpless than ever. James tried to comfort me, but even he admitted he didn't know what else we could do. That night, as I sat in Noah's nursery, I couldn't shake the feeling that Nate was out there, somewhere, waiting. I decided to take matters into my own hands. The next morning, I installed cameras around our house, on the front porch, the backyard, even one facing Noah's crib. If Nate was going to keep this up, I'd have the evidence to stop him. For a while, things were quiet. No strange encounters, no sightings of Nate. I started to think maybe he'd given up. But then, about 2 weeks later, I got the notification. My phone buzzed with an alert. Motion detected, front porch. I opened the camera feed and my blood ran cold. There he was, standing in the shadows, looking directly at the camera. His face was partially obscured by a hoodie, but I knew it was him. He didn't move. He didn't try to come closer. He just stared for what felt like an eternity before turning and disappearing into the night. The next morning, I felt like a zombie. I hadn't slept at all after seeing Nate on the camera. My mind was racing with questions. What did he want? Why was he so fixated on Noah? And more importantly, how was I supposed to keep my family safe? I showed James the footage as soon as he woke up. He was furious, pacing the kitchen and muttering about how the police should have done more. "We need to show them this," he said, pointing at the phone. "They can't ignore it now." I agreed, but before we could head to the station, I stepped outside to grab the morning paper. That's when I saw it, a folded piece of paper sitting neatly on our front porch, right where Nate had stood the night before. My stomach twisted as I picked it up, already dreading what it might say. The note was written in messy, almost childlike handwriting. "You and your baby are safe, for now, but he's special. Don't you feel it?" I froze, the note trembling in my hands. Safe for now? What the hell did that mean? I rushed back inside, showed James, and immediately called the police. This time they took me seriously. An officer came by to collect the note and I handed over the footage from the camera. "We'll investigate," the officer assured me, but his tone didn't inspire much confidence. "In the meantime, make sure your doors and windows are locked. And if you see him again, call us immediately." After they left, I felt more paranoid than ever. Every creak, every shadow outside the window felt like a threat. I started sleeping in Noah's room at night, just to make sure he was okay. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. A few days passed and I was hanging on by a thread. My nerves were shot, my patience was thin, and the cameras became my new obsession. I checked the feeds constantly, half hoping I wouldn't see anything, half expecting Nate to show up again. And then one afternoon, he did. I was scrolling through my phone while Noah napped when a notification popped up. Motion detected. Backyard. My heart stopped. I opened the feed and there he was, standing just beyond the fence, staring at the house. He didn't try to get closer this time, but the sight of him sent me into a full-blown panic. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, Nate was gone again. The officers searched the area and promised to keep an eye out, but their reassurances felt hollow. I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed to end this. That evening, I made a decision. I remembered something from one of the earlier police reports. They mentioned Nate had gotten a new job at a gas station not far from our neighborhood. I knew it was risky, but I had to confront him. I had to make it clear that he couldn't keep doing this. The next day I drove to the gas station, parked, and walked inside. There he was, standing behind the counter, looking as smug as ever. The second he saw me, his grin widened. "Emma," he said, drawing out my name like we were old friends. "I was wondering when I'd see you again." I clenched my fists, my whole body shaking with rage. "Leave my family alone," I snapped. "I don't know what your deal is, but this ends now. Stay away from us." He tilted his head like he was amused. "I'm not doing anything wrong. Just looking out for a special kid, that's all. You'll understand one day." His words sent a shiver down my spine. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but instead I turned and walked out of the store, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the car keys. As soon as I got home, I handed the police everything, the footage, the note, and now this encounter. Finally, they had enough to act. It felt like a weight had been lifted when the police finally took action. The next day, they arrested Nate at his workplace for stalking and harassment. When I got the call, I thought I'd finally be able to breathe again. They assured me he would face charges, and at the very least, I'd have some peace for a while. But peace wasn't exactly what followed. For the first few weeks, things seemed normal, almost too normal. No strange faces at the window, no creepy notes on the porch, no motion alerts from the cameras. I tried to convince myself it was over, that Nate would never bother us again. But the paranoia didn't leave. Every time I walked past a window, I'd glance outside. Every time I stepped into a store, I'd scan the aisles for his face. And every night I made sure every lock was double-checked before going to bed. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed with a notification. Motion detected. Backyard. My stomach dropped. I hadn't gotten an alert in weeks, and I'd started to believe the cameras were just another layer of security I didn't need anymore. With trembling hands, I opened the live feed. At first, I didn't see anything. The backyard was still, bathed in the dim glow of the porch light. I exhaled shakily, convincing myself it was probably a raccoon or the wind. But just as I was about to close the app, something moved. A figure stepped into the edge of the camera's view, hood pulled low over their face. My breath caught in my throat. They stood there for a moment, motionless, before slowly lifting their head. It wasn't Nate. It was someone else. A new face, but the same unsettling grin. And then, as if they knew I was watching, they leaned toward the camera, held up a piece of paper, and pressed it against the lens. I froze, staring at the screen as the words on the paper came into focus. "He isn't the only one watching." The figure turned and walked off into the darkness, leaving me paralyzed with fear. My heart raced as I ran to check on Noah, who was sound asleep in his crib, blissfully unaware of the nightmare unfolding around us. I called the police, but I already knew how it would go. They'd take a report, promise to patrol the area, and then it would be up to me to stay vigilant. Even now, as I tell you this, I don't feel safe. I don't know who that person was or if they're connected to Nate. I don't know why they're watching us or what they want. But I do know one thing. This isn't over. And I'm terrified that it never will be. It wasn't the kind of night I'd planned, but sometimes life throws you a pleasant surprise. My tax refund had hit my account that morning, and for once, it wasn't the measly few $100s I'd been expecting. It was enough to cover my rent for the next 2 months, with plenty left over. I felt like I could finally breathe for a while. After work, I decided to hit up the Walmart near my apartment in Phoenix. It wasn't the nicest neighborhood, but I'd shopped there plenty of times without issues. The lot was well lit, and the late night hours usually meant fewer people around. Still, there was this little nagging thought in the back of my head. Don't flash that cash. The parking lot was quiet when I arrived, just a handful of cars scattered here and there. I parked under one of the tall streetlights, the kind that hums faintly in the silence. Inside the store, I wandered the aisles, grabbing groceries and a few other things I'd been putting off buying for months. I felt good, secure even, like I was finally getting things in order. But as I pushed my cart to checkout, I noticed something strange. A guy in a dark hoodie seemed to be lingering near the entrance. He wasn't shopping, wasn't looking at his phone, just standing there, his hands jammed into his pockets. I brushed it off. Probably waiting for someone, I thought. Still, something about him stuck with me. When I finished paying and headed for the exit, he was gone, and I felt a little wave of relief. But that relief didn't last long. As I walked toward my car, I couldn't shake this feeling that the air had changed. It wasn't the cool breeze or the hum of the streetlights, it was something else. The kind of stillness that makes your skin crawl. I started loading my groceries into the trunk, trying to ignore the unease. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement. A figure stepped out from behind a parked van a few rows over. He was wearing a gray hoodie, the same guy I'd seen inside. This time, his hood was pulled up, shadowing his face, but I could feel his eyes on me. My heart started pounding as he moved closer, his steps slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking prey. "Hey," he called out, his voice low but carrying across the empty lot. I froze, gripping the handle of my cart like it was some kind of shield. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He pulled a knife from his pocket, the blade catching the streetlight's glow. "Just give me the cash," he said, taking another step forward. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My mind raced, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run, but my feet wouldn't move. "I don't have any cash on me," I blurted out, my voice cracking. His laugh was cold and sharp. "Don't lie to me, I saw you in there, just hand it over and no one gets hurt." I glanced around, desperate for an escape, but the lot was empty. Just me, him, and the faint hum of the streetlights. My mind was spinning, trying to think of a way out when I heard it. The sound of shopping carts rattling. 2 Walmart employees were coming from the far end of the lot, pushing a long train of carts back toward the store. They were talking and laughing, their voices carrying in the stillness. The guy with the knife glanced over his shoulder, distracted for just a second. That's when I made my move. I grabbed a bag of groceries from the cart and hurled it at him. It wasn't much, just a bag of canned goods, but it hit his arm and he stumbled back. Without thinking, I turned and sprinted toward the store, my legs pumping like I was in a race for my life. "Help!" I shouted, my voice breaking as I waved at the employees. "He's got a knife!" The 2 workers froze, their eyes wide as they saw me running toward them. One of them, a stocky guy in his early 20s, stepped forward, his hands up like he was ready to fight. The man in the hoodie didn't follow me. He stood there for a moment, his hood still casting shadows over his face. Then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he turned and bolted, disappearing into the maze of parked cars. Inside the store, I felt like I could finally breathe again, but my heart was still racing. The employees led me to the customer service desk, where the manager called the police. I could feel the stares of other customers as I sat down, my hands trembling. When the cops arrived, I told them everything. The knife, the hoodie, the way he'd watched me inside the store. They asked if I'd seen which direction he went, but I hadn't. All I could do was describe his face, or what little I'd seen of it. One of the officers walked me back out to my car, flashlight in hand. As we approached, I half expected to see the guy standing there waiting for me. But the lot was empty, my car untouched. Still, the thought of driving home alone made my stomach churn. The officer stayed until I'd loaded my groceries and locked the doors. "Be careful out there," he said as I pulled away. That night I barely slept. Every creak and groan of my apartment felt like a threat. I double-checked the locks on my doors and windows, but it didn't help. I couldn't shake the image of his knife, or the way he'd laughed when I said I didn't have cash. Weeks passed, and I started to feel normal again. I'd told a few friends about what happened, but I left out some of the scarier details. I didn't want them to think I was paranoid. Then one evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a detective with the Phoenix Police Department. "We think we've got the guy who tried to rob you," he said. My heart skipped a beat. The detective explained that the man had been arrested for a different crime, a violent carjacking just a few blocks from the Walmart where I'd been attacked. They'd matched his description to my report, and they wanted me to come in and confirm it was him. When I saw his mugshot, my stomach turned. It was him, no doubt about it. The same cold eyes, the same smirk. He didn't even look sorry. Testifying against him in court was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Sitting there, recounting every terrifying detail while he stared at me from across the room, it felt like I was back in that parking lot all over again. But in the end, it was worth it. He was convicted, not just for what he did to me, but for the other crimes he'd committed. Knowing he was off the streets brought me some peace, but it also left me with something else, a lesson. I used to think I was invincible, that bad things only happen to other people. But that night in the parking lot changed me. Now I'm more cautious. I don't shop late at night, and I always stay aware of my surroundings. But more than that, it taught me to appreciate the little acts of kindness that can make all the difference. Those Walmart employees probably didn't realize it, but their laughter, their presence, they saved me that night. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that sometimes the smallest things can be the most important. Working in customer service is mostly routine, answering questions, solving problems, and sometimes dealing with difficult people. But every now and then, you get a call that sticks with you for better or worse. This one started off innocent enough. It was a quiet Tuesday morning in Seattle, and I was sipping my usual cup of coffee when the call came in. The man on the other end introduced himself as David and said he needed help with a billing issue for his software subscription. He sounded friendly. Almost too friendly, but I brushed it off. As I worked through his problem, we started talking. He mentioned he lived in Denver, Colorado, and to my surprise, said he knew Littleton, my hometown. That caught me off guard. I hadn't mentioned where I was from. Maybe it was a lucky guess, but it felt odd. I used to visit Littleton all the time, he said casually. Do you ever go back there? Maybe for the holidays? I hesitated but answered politely. Yeah, I visit my parents for Christmas sometimes. It felt harmless, just small talk, but something about how he phrased his questions made me uncomfortable. Oh, that's nice, he replied, his tone warm. It must be a great place to spend the holidays. I wrapped up the call as quickly as I could, brushing off the slight unease. I had dealt with plenty of chatty customers before, and this didn't feel any different. At least not yet. Fast forward a couple of weeks and I was back home in Littleton, enjoying a much-needed break with my parents. Their house was nestled in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where people still wave at each other from their front porches. It always felt like a safe haven, until that day. It was Christmas Eve, and the air smelled like pine and freshly baked cookies. My mom was in the kitchen humming to holiday music, and I was lounging on the couch when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and neither were my parents. "I'll get it," I called out, walking to the door. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. Standing there, holding a small, wrapped gift, was David. "Hi, surprise," he said, grinning like we were old friends. For a moment, I froze. How the hell did he know where my parents lived? "David, what are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, I was in the area visiting family and thought it would be nice to stop by and wish you a Merry Christmas," he said, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. My mom peeked around the corner, curious about who was at the door. I didn't want to alarm her, so I plastered on a fake smile and stepped outside, closing the door behind me. "That's really not appropriate," I said quietly, keeping my tone firm but polite. "You shouldn't be here." He looked genuinely confused, like he couldn't understand why I wasn't thrilled to see him. "I just thought it'd be nice to meet in person. You were so kind on the phone." I managed to send him on his way after an awkward exchange, but the whole thing left me shaken. As I watched him walk back to his car parked a little too far down the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last time I'd see him. After that encounter, I thought I'd seen the last of David. I mean, who drives to someone's parents' house uninvited and thinks it's normal? But a part of me couldn't let it go. It felt off, like a puzzle piece that didn't fit, but I couldn't figure out why. The next day, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, and sure enough, it was him. "Hey, it's David," he said, his voice way too chipper for someone who had crossed a major line. "I just wanted to see if you're free to grab coffee. There's this great little spot downtown I think you'd love." "David," I interrupted, trying to keep my tone calm. "I don't think it's appropriate for us to meet outside of work. I really need you to respect that." There was a pause, and then he laughed nervously. "Oh, come on. Don't be like that. I just feel like we really connected, you know?" The pit in my stomach grew deeper. "I don't think we did, David. Please don't call me again." I hung up before he could respond, but the calls kept coming. Sometimes from blocked numbers, sometimes from random area codes. When I didn't pick up, he'd leave long, rambling voicemails, talking about how he just wanted to see me, how he felt like I understood him in a way no one else did. The worst part? I started noticing him around. At first, it was subtle. I'd go to the grocery store and feel like someone was watching me. Then one evening, I stopped by a local coffee shop and spotted him sitting at a corner table, pretending not to notice me. My parents thought I was being paranoid, but I knew better. He wasn't just calling anymore. He was following me. By the time my trip was nearing its end, I was exhausted. Sleep didn't come easy when every creak in the house made my skin crawl. The morning I was supposed to leave, I stepped outside to load my bags into the car. The air was crisp and the snow on the ground crunched under my boots. For a moment, I let myself relax. Then I saw him. He was partially hidden behind a tree across the street, but I recognized him instantly. David. He wasn't even trying to be discreet. He just stood there watching me. My heart raced and my mind scrambled for what to do. Should I confront him? Call the police? Run back inside? "Mom!" I called out, my voice shaking. "Call 911. David must have heard me because he turned and bolted before my mom even made it to the door. By the time the police arrived, he was long gone, leaving nothing but a deep sense of unease in his wake. That was the last time I saw him in person, but the damage was done. He knew where my parents lived. He knew enough about me to find me if he wanted to, and I knew he wasn't going to just disappear from my mind anytime soon. When I got back to Seattle, I thought I'd finally feel safe. I changed my phone number, deleted all my social media accounts, and even started parking my car in a different spot at work every day just in case. But the thing about fear is that it sticks with you. For weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that David was still watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to show up again. Every time my phone rang or I saw someone lingering outside my apartment building, my heart would race. I filed a report with the police in Denver, but they said there wasn't much they could do since he hadn't committed an actual crime. "Keep an eye out and let us know if he contacts you again," they said, as if that would help me sleep at night. I started looking over my shoulder everywhere I went. Was that man at the bus stop staring at me for too long? Was the woman sitting a few rows back on the train somehow connected to him? The paranoia was like a shadow, always there, always whispering that I wasn't safe. Months went by, and though I never heard from David again, the memory of his obsession stayed with me. I couldn't even visit my parents without scanning the neighborhood for his car, or imagining him standing behind another tree, watching me. This whole experience taught me a lesson I'll never forget. You never really know what people are capable of. What seems like an innocent interaction could turn into your worst nightmare. And now, I'm careful about every word I say to strangers. Because once someone crosses that line, there's no going back. Jenna and I were inseparable. We met working the early morning shifts at the Starbucks on North Michigan Avenue in Chicago. It didn't take long for us to click. We bonded over our love for overpriced iced lattes and mutual complaints about customers who didn't know how to order. You know, the ones who think a macchiato is just a fancy latte. Jenna made work fun, and honestly, she felt more like a sister than a co-worker. Jenna was ambitious, like, really ambitious. She always talked about her plans to climb the ladder, first as a shift supervisor, then a manager, and maybe even run her own store one day. I admired that about her. She was driven and confident, while I was just trying to make ends meet and figure out my next steps. When the promotion to shift supervisor came up, I didn't think I had a shot. Jenna was the obvious choice. Everyone knew how hard she worked, and she made sure they knew it too. So when the manager called me into the office and told me I got the position, I was shocked and kind of guilty. Jenna congratulated me, of course, but I could feel it. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. At first I brushed it off. Maybe she just needed time to adjust. But soon, the shift in her behavior became impossible to ignore. Jenna started pulling away, little by little. She'd skip our usual after-work coffee runs, claiming she was too tired or had plans. At work, she was different. Her cheerful demeanor was replaced with cold, clipped responses, and she started avoiding me altogether. I'd catch her whispering with other co-workers, and when I walked by, the conversations would abruptly stop. I could feel the tension, even if no one said anything outright. It all came to a head during a company event at Navy Pier. It was supposed to be a fun day to bond with co-workers, but Jenna spent the entire time avoiding me. At one point, I saw her across the room laughing with a group of people, but the second our eyes met, her face hardened, and she turned her back to me. I told myself it wasn't personal, but deep down, I knew it was. Things got even more uncomfortable when I started dating Ryan, one of our regulars at the cafe. Ryan was charming, funny, and had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. I'd caught Jenna glancing at him a few times before we started dating, but I never thought much of it. That is, until she started making comments, subtle but biting. "So, how's Mr. Perfect?" she'd say, with just enough sarcasm to make me feel uneasy. And then there were the questions. How serious are you guys? Do you even really know him? At first I thought she was just being protective, but looking back now I realize it was something much darker. It wasn't just the comments that started to get under my skin. Jenna's behavior became off. Ryan was the first to notice. "Hey, did your friend Jenna follow me on Instagram?" he asked one night while we were watching a movie. I paused, confused. "Jenna? Are you sure?" He showed me his phone, and there it was, Jenna's profile sitting in his list of followers. At first, I didn't think it was a big deal. Maybe she just wanted to be friendly, stay connected, right? But then she started liking his old posts. Not the recent ones, old ones. Pictures from years ago, before we even met. Ryan shrugged it off, but I could tell it weirded him out. It didn't stop there. One Saturday morning, Ryan went for his usual run at Millennium Park. When he got back, he looked unsettled. "You won't believe who I ran into," he said. I didn't even need him to say her name. "Jenna?" I guessed. He nodded, running his hands through his hair. "She just showed up, said she was in the area, but it's not like she runs or anything. She just stood there watching." I tried confronting her about it. I texted her that night, asking why she was at the park. She replied almost instantly, "What, I can't enjoy the park too?" There was no apology, no explanation, just that cold, passive-aggressive tone she'd perfected. I started to feel like I was losing control of the situation, and I hated it. A week later, I got a text from Jenna. "We need to talk. Meet me at the Wormhole." The Wormhole Coffee was one of our favorite spots back when things were good between us, so I thought maybe this was her way of making amends. I hoped for the best, but prepared for the worst. When I walked in, Jenna was already there, sitting in the corner with a coffee she hadn't touched. Her hands were clasped tightly, and her eyes darted around the room like she was looking for someone. I sat down across from her, trying to keep things calm. "Hey," I started, but she cut me off. "You've changed," she said flatly. "Ever since you got that promotion. Ever since you started dating Ryan." You think you're better than me, don't you? Her voice was low but sharp, like a knife cutting through the air. I was stunned. Jenna, that's not true. You took everything from me, she hissed, leaning in so close I could smell the bitterness in her tone. My promotion, my best friend, and now you're flaunting him around like some kind of trophy. I didn't know what to say. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Before I could respond, her phone buzzed and she glanced at the screen. Her face twisted into a smirk. Speak of the devil, she muttered. I didn't understand what she meant until Ryan walked in, looking just as confused as I felt. Ryan, what are you doing here? I asked, standing up. I got a text from you, he said, holding up his phone. My blood ran cold. I hadn't sent him anything. Before I could process what was happening, Jenna reached into her bag and pulled out a knife. The room seemed to freeze. Ryan took a step back, but Jenna was quick, lunging toward him with a wild, desperate look in her eyes. You don't deserve her! She screamed. People in the cafe started shouting, some scrambling to call 911 while I grabbed Jenna's arm, trying to stop her. The struggle felt like it lasted forever, though it was probably only seconds. Ryan managed to push her off, but not before she slashed his arm. Blood soaked through his shirt as he stumbled back, clutching the wound. Jenna dropped the knife and collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't mean to. I just wanted her back, she whispered, rocking back and forth as sirens wailed in the distance. The cops arrived within minutes, but it felt like hours. Jenna was still on the floor when they cuffed her, her sobs now quiet, replaced by a blank, empty stare. Ryan was rushed to the hospital and I stayed behind to give my statement. I could barely process what had just happened. My best friend, no, my former best friend, had attacked my boyfriend. And for what? Some twisted sense of betrayal? Ryan survived, but things between us were never the same. The attack had left a scar on his arm, but the emotional scars on both of us ran much deeper. Every time I looked at him, I couldn't help but think about that moment in the cafe, about how close we had come to something far worse. Eventually, we drifted apart. It wasn't anyone's fault, really. The weight of what happened was just too much to carry together. As for Jenna, she was sentenced to 15 years in prison for attempted murder and stalking. During the trial, the full extent of her obsession came to light. She had been following Ryan for weeks, sending him anonymous messages, and even tracking my schedule through mutual co-workers. She told the court that she just wanted her old life back, that she thought getting rid of Ryan would fix everything. But there was no fixing this. Not anymore. I wish I could say I moved on quickly, that I bounced back and rebuilt my life without any trouble. But the truth is, the fear stayed with me. I started looking over my shoulder everywhere I went. I couldn't trust people the way I used to. Jenna wasn't just my best friend. She was the person I trusted most. If she could do this, what about everyone else? Sometimes, late at night, I replay the memories in my head. The laughter we shared, the silly inside jokes, the times we stayed up late talking about our dreams. I wonder if any of it was real, or if the seeds of her obsession had been planted long before I ever noticed. The hardest part isn't the fear, it's the loss. The loss of who Jenna was or who I thought she was, and the loss of the person I used to be before all this happened. If there's one thing I've learned, it's to trust my instincts, the little signs I ignored, the uneasy feelings I pushed aside. They were all there, warning me. I just didn't want to see them. Now, I don't take those feelings lightly. And if you're listening to this, I hope you don't either. Because sometimes, the people closest to you can become the ones you fear the most. I'll never forget the first day I walked into Macy's on State Street in Chicago. I was 19, fresh out of high school, and determined to make my own way. That job wasn't exactly my dream career, but I was excited to have it. The store felt massive, almost intimidating with its high ceilings and rows of endless displays. I started in women's clothing, folding sweaters and greeting customers with my "Can I help you?" smile that I practiced 1,000 times in the mirror. At first, things were simple. The occasional rude customer, sure, but nothing I couldn't handle. Until my second week, when I met him, this older man with deep-set eyes and a raspy voice. He shuffled up to the counter while I was refolding a pile of shirts. Without even looking at me, he muttered, "You work near the shadows now, don't let them catch you." I froze. "Excuse me?" I asked, trying to sound polite. But when I looked up, he was already walking away, disappearing into the sea of shoppers like a ghost. I laughed it off. Maybe he was just a weird old guy who enjoyed creeping out new employees. But the words stuck with me, like a splinter you can't pull out. Fast forward a year and I had finally been promoted. They moved me to the customer service desk where I handled returns, exchanges, and complaints. Honestly, I was proud of myself. It felt like I was doing something important, until I realized the customer service desk was just code for dealing with the worst kind of people. That's where I met Mary, or as we called her behind her back, Mad Mary. She wasn't just another difficult customer. She was a legend. The kind of person who could turn a slow day into your personal nightmare. Mary would stomp into the store like she owned it, dragging a cart filled with random items she claimed were defective. She always found something to complain about. Scratches that weren't there, price tags that she swore were switched, even imaginary items she accused us of hiding from her. But it wasn't just her temper that made her infamous. It was the way she'd look at you, her pale blue eyes locking onto yours like she could see right through you. And her voice, a low, almost monotone growl that sent shivers down my spine every time she said my name. One afternoon, I was sorting through returns when Mary stormed up to my counter. "This store is a scam," she barked, slamming a vase onto the counter so hard I thought it would shatter. "I bought this on sale for $15 last week, and now it's marked as $20. Explain that to me." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say anything, she leaned in close. Too close. "You think you're smart, don't you?" she whispered, her breath cold against my skin. "You don't even see what's happening here." Her words made no sense, but the way she said them, it felt like a warning. Mary became a regular, much to everyone's dismay. She had this talent for showing up when things were already chaotic, like during a weekend sale or right before closing. Every time she brought a storm of complaints and accusations. One afternoon, the store was packed, and I was juggling 3 customers at once when I saw her. Mary marched straight to my counter, her cart overflowing with random items. Half of them didn't even look like they came from our store. She slammed a stack of dish towels onto the counter. "These were $9.99 yesterday. Now they're $12.99. Explain that to me," she snapped, glaring at me with those piercing eyes. I tried to stay calm. "Ma'am, prices can fluctuate depending on sales and inventory," I said, forcing my politest smile. But Mary wasn't having it. "Don't you dare lie to me," she shouted, loud enough for half the store to hear. Shoppers nearby turned to watch the scene unfold, and I could feel my face burning with embarrassment. I tried again. "If you have your receipt, I can look up the original price for you." "You think I'm stupid?" she hissed, leaning closer. Her face was inches from mine now, and I could see the sweat glistening on her forehead. "They told me about you. You're part of it, aren't you?" "Part of... what?" I stammered, completely thrown off. Her eyes narrowed. "The ones who watch, the ones in the shadows. You're working for them." Before I could respond, she grabbed one of the dish towels and hurled it at me. "Keep it," she snarled before storming off, leaving her cart in the middle of the aisle. I should have shrugged it off as just another crazy customer, but the way she said those words like she believed them made my stomach churn. The next time Mary came in, it was worse. Much worse. It was a Friday evening and the store was a zoo. I was already exhausted when I saw her at the entrance, pushing her cart like a woman on a mission. "Not today," I muttered under my breath. But of course she headed straight for me. This time she wasn't yelling. She was muttering under her breath, almost like she was talking to someone invisible beside her. I forced myself to greet her. "Hi, Mary. What can I help you with today?" She stopped in front of my counter, her eyes darting around like she was looking for something, or someone. "They're here," she whispered, loud enough for only me to hear. "Who's here?" I asked, genuinely confused. "The Watchers," she said, her voice trembling. "They're everywhere. I've seen them watching you too. They want you." I took a deep breath. "Mary, if you're feeling unsafe, maybe you should..." But before I could finish, she lashed out. Her hand shot across the counter, grabbing my wrist with surprising strength. "Don't act like you don't know," she snarled. "You're part of their game." I yanked my arm free and stepped back, my heart racing. "Mary, I'm going to have to call security if you don't calm down," I warned, trying to keep my voice steady. That's when she lost it. She shoved the cart aside, sending it crashing into a display of glassware. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the store, and customers gasped in shock. Mary turned back to me, her face twisted in rage. "You can't stop them," she screamed. Then, in a flash, she lunged at me. Before I knew it, she had tackled me to the ground, her weight pinning me down. I struggled to breathe as she shouted incoherent phrases about shadows and watchers. It felt like an eternity before security arrived. But the moment they tried to grab her, Mary did something that chilled me to the bone. She laughed. A low, guttural laugh that didn't sound human. Then, just like that, she shoved them off and ran. The weirdest part? She didn't run toward the exit. She disappeared into a side corridor, one that led to a section of the store that had been closed off for renovations for months. When the guards chased after her, she was gone. After that night, I couldn't shake what happened. I told myself Mary was just a disturbed woman, someone who needed help. But deep down, something felt wrong. The way she disappeared, the things she said, it was like she knew something I didn't. The next day, I asked my manager, Karen, if anyone had seen Mary leave the store. She shrugged, brushing it off like it was nothing. "She's just a crazy lady," Karen said. "Security probably scared her off for good." But she wasn't gone. Not really. A week later, while closing the store late at night, I decided to take a detour. Something about that side corridor where Mary disappeared kept nagging at me. It wasn't a place I'd ever thought twice about, just a section under construction. But now it felt like a black hole pulling at my curiosity. The corridor was dark, the lights flickering faintly. As I walked further in, the air grew colder. The unfinished shelves and empty racks cast eerie shadows on the walls and every sound. My footsteps, the hum of the lights, felt amplified. At the end of the corridor, there was a door. It wasn't locked, but it creaked loudly when I pushed it open. What I found inside made my stomach drop. The room was small, almost like a storage closet, but the walls were covered with something that made my skin crawl. Photos. Dozens of photos, all pinned haphazardly, showing employees and customers. And there, in the center of it all, was a picture of me. It wasn't just any photo, it was one from my high school graduation. A picture I knew I'd never shared. My heart raced as I backed away, slamming the door shut. I ran back to the main floor, telling myself it had to be some sick joke. But who would do something like that? And how did they get that photo? After finding the photos, I couldn't focus. Every shift I felt like someone was watching me. Customers, co-workers, even security, it didn't matter. That feeling was always there, like eyes boring into the back of my skull. One night, while working a late shift, I spotted her again. Mary. She wasn't storming through the store or yelling this time. She was standing in the corner near the fitting room, staring at me. "Not again," I muttered under my breath. But this time, I wasn't going to let her scare me. I marched straight over, my heart pounding in my chest. "Mary, what do you want from me?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. She tilted her head, a crooked smile spreading across her face. "It's not about what I want," she said softly. "It's about them." "Who are they?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You'll see," she whispered. Then, before I could react, she turned and walked toward the corridor. I hesitated for a moment, but something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let her disappear again. I followed her, my footsteps quickening as she turned the corner into the dark hallway. "Mary," I shouted, "stop running." But when I reached the end of the corridor, she was gone. Again. Except this time, the door to the storage room was wide open. I stepped inside, my hands trembling. The photos were gone, replaced by something far worse. Writing scrawled across the walls in what looked like black ink. "They're watching you" was repeated over and over, covering every inch of the space. And then I heard it. A low, guttural laugh echoing behind me. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. That was when I realized I wasn't alone in that store anymore. After that night, I couldn't go back to work the same way. Every shift felt like walking into a trap, a game I didn't understand. My manager, Karen, insisted I was imagining things. "You're stressed," she said, handing me a coupon for a free coffee. "Take a break. Mary's probably banned by now." But Mary wasn't the real problem. Deep down, I knew that. Whatever was happening went beyond her tantrums and accusations. The things she said, the photos, the writing on the walls, they weren't random. They were warnings. I started to avoid the corridor altogether, but the feeling of being watched never left. Even when I wasn't at work, I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, or hear faint whispers when no one was around. I told myself it was paranoia, but the fear felt too real. Then came my last shift at Macy's. It was a quiet Tuesday evening, and I was working alone at the customer service desk. Most of the shoppers had left, and the store was eerily silent. I was about to start counting the till when I noticed something on the counter, a photo. It wasn't there a moment ago, and I hadn't seen anyone come near. My blood ran cold as I picked it up. It was a picture of me from earlier that day, taken in my car. Written across the bottom in shaky black letters was a single word: tonight. I didn't wait to find out what it meant. I grabbed my things, clocked out, and bolted for the door. As I stepped outside, the cold Chicago wind hit me, but it wasn't comforting. It felt like it was trying to push me back inside. I didn't look back. I couldn't. That night, as I sat in my apartment trying to process everything, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You can't escape the Watchers." I quit the next morning. Karen was furious, but I didn't care. I couldn't stay in that place another second. Whatever the Watchers were, I wasn't going to let them take me. It's been years since then, and I've moved on with my life. I don't work in retail anymore, and I avoid big department stores altogether. But sometimes, late at night, I still feel their presence. The cold air, the whispers, the eyes I can't see but know are there. If you're ever working in customer service and someone warns you about them, listen, don't be like me. Leave before it's too late. Working the night shift at Walmart in Houston wasn't what I dreamed of doing, but it kept the lights on and the bills paid. By now I'd seen it all. Angry customers, shoplifters, people returning items that clearly didn't belong to our store. But nothing had prepared me for that night. It was a Wednesday, slow, quiet, the kind of shift where time dragged and every creak or hum of the store felt unnervingly loud. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above the customer service counter where I stood, absently straightening receipts. Ryan, my coworker, was stocking shelves nearby, humming to himself. I didn't notice him at first. The man. He slipped in so quietly that it was like he materialized out of the shadows. Late 40s, maybe 50, with a scruffy beard and bloodshot eyes. He wore a dirty hoodie and had a child's car seat tucked under one arm. There was something about the way he moved, jittery, tense, like a spring wound too tightly. "Can I return this?" he asked, his voice sharp and impatient. I plastered on my customer service smile. "Sure. Do you have a receipt?" His eyes narrowed, and his lips twisted into a sneer. "You don't need a receipt for a damn return." I swallowed hard, keeping my voice level. "Actually, we do. It's store policy." He didn't say anything right away, just stared at me. His silence felt heavier than his words ever could. Then finally he muttered, "Figures." He slapped the car seat down on the counter and turned to leave, muttering under his breath. I didn't catch all of it, but the words "stupid bitch" were unmistakable. I sighed, glancing over at Ryan. What are the odds he needs this money for something sketchy? I whispered, rolling my eyes. Ryan chuckled, but the sound died in his throat as the man turned around. What did you just say? His voice was low and venomous, his bloodshot eyes locking onto mine. My stomach dropped. He'd heard me. Nothing, I stammered, heat rushing to my face. He took a step closer, his expression twisting into something dangerous. You think you're funny, huh? You think you're better than me? Sir, I didn't mean... Shut up, he snapped. He leaned over the counter, his face inches from mine. You don't know who you're messing with. You'll regret it. My heart pounded as he backed away, his gaze still drilling into me. He didn't say another word as he left, but the air he left behind felt suffocating. You okay? Ryan asked after the door closed behind the man. I nodded, but my hands trembled as I reached for the car seat on the counter. I didn't think he'd hear me. Well, he's gone now, Ryan said, trying to sound reassuring. Probably just blowing off steam. But I wasn't so sure. The rest of my shift passed in a blur, but that man's face was burned into my mind. His anger felt personal, like I'd insulted something sacred to him. I kept glancing at the doors, half expecting him to come back. By the time my shift ended, the parking lot was eerily quiet. Most of the cars were gone, and the few that remained sat under dim, flickering lights. Ryan, I said as we clocked out, can you walk me to my car? He raised an eyebrow. Still spooked about that guy? Just humor me, okay? We stepped outside together, and the cold night air made me shiver. My car was parked near the far end of the lot, a decision I instantly regretted. As we walked, my eyes darted to every shadow, every corner, looking for movement. Relax, Ryan said with a chuckle. He's not here. But then I saw it. Parked near the edge of the lot was a beat-up green truck. The headlights were off, but I could see the faint outline of a figure sitting inside. It's him, I whispered, my voice trembling. Ryan's expression darkened. Get in your car, now. We hurried to my car, and I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly that I dropped them. As I bent down to pick them up, the truck's engine roared to life. The headlights came on, blinding us. He's coming, Ryan said, his voice tight. Get in! I scrambled into the driver's seat just as the truck lurched forward, its tires screeching against the asphalt. The truck swerved toward us, and my heart felt like it was about to explode. Ryan banged on the hood of my car. Go, drive! I didn't need to be told twice. I jammed the key into the ignition, my hands shaking so badly that it took 2 tries. The moment the engine roared to life, I floored it, the car lurching forward as the truck's bumper missed me by inches. He was chasing us. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. What the hell is wrong with him? I shouted, my voice cracking. Ryan twisted in his seat, looking back. Just drive. Don't stop until we're somewhere with people. The truck's headlights filled my rearview mirror so bright I could barely see the road. He was honking his horn, revving his engine, doing everything he could to rattle me. I turned onto a main road, hoping to lose him in traffic, but the streets were nearly empty at this hour. He stayed right behind me, so close that I could hear the rumble of his engine over the pounding of my heart. There's a gas station up ahead, Ryan said. Pull in there, maybe someone can help. It felt like a terrible idea, but I didn't have any better ones. I turned sharply into the gas station lot, my tires screeching as I came to a stop near the entrance. The truck skidded in after me, its headlights still blazing. Ryan jumped out of the car, waving his arms at the clerk inside. Call the cops, he shouted. The truck's driver slammed on the brakes, his door flying open. For the first time, I got a good look at him. His face was twisted with rage, his eyes wild and unfocused. You think you can mess with me? He screamed, pointing a finger at me. I shrank back in my seat, frozen with fear. But before he could take another step, the gas station clerk stepped outside, holding a phone to his ear. I'm on the phone with the police, the clerk said loudly. You'd better get the hell out of here. The man hesitated, his gaze darting between me, Ryan, and the clerk. Then, without another word, He climbed back into his truck and sped off, tires screeching as he disappeared into the night. It took me a few minutes to stop shaking. Ryan stayed by my side, his face pale but calm. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded, but the truth was I didn't feel okay. I felt like I was going to throw up. The cops arrived about 10 minutes later, taking statements from me, Ryan, and the gas station clerk. They asked for a description of the man and his truck, and I gave them everything I could remember. "Do you think you'll find him?" I asked one of the officers. "We'll do our best," he said, but his tone wasn't reassuring. For the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I left work, I scanned the parking lot for that green truck. Every time I heard a car engine behind me, my heart raced. Then one night I found another note. It was taped to my apartment door, written in the same messy handwriting as the first. "You'll never be safe." I called the cops immediately, but by the time they arrived, the man was long gone. They took the note as evidence, but I could tell they didn't have much hope of catching him. Eventually, the note stopped. The truck stopped showing up. Life went back to normal, or as normal as it could be after something like that. But even now, years later, I still check my rearview mirror more often than I need to. I still avoid parking lots late at night, and I still wonder if he's out there, waiting for the right moment to come back.